Hey ladies, welcome to chapter 9 of The Wounded Heart. This chapter is called Style of Relating. It begins by saying that obvious secondary symptoms of abuse are not always present, but inevitably you can recognize past damage showing up in someone's life through their style of relating to others. So the author asks, what is a relational style? This is the typical way of protecting oneself in contact with other people. So self-protection, he says, is the commitment to never be hurt again, never feel powerless, betrayed, or ambivalent in the way that we once were. He shares a Bible verse here, Isaiah chapter 50, verses 10 through 11. Who among you fears the Lord and obeys the word of his servant? Let him who walks in the dark, who has no light, trust in the name of the Lord and rely on his God. But now, all you who light fires and provide yourselves with flaming torches, go, walk in the light of your fires, and of the torches you have set ablaze. This is what you shall receive from my hand. You will lie down in torment. I found this Bible verse pretty fascinating because there's a lot of context that needs to be understood here. And it's implying that suffering will come if you try to just keep imposing your will. If you're walking on a path where you don't see a way out, you don't see a form of light to follow, and we just keep trying to figure it out. So the darkness here could mean confusion and struggle. The author shares here that it is absolutely reasonable to want to turn on a light at night in a strange room. Maybe you can see a shadow, maybe you're not sure of where the furniture is. Of course, you want to turn on the light and avoid harm. He likens this to the reasonable desire to avoid pain, discomfort, and shame in relating to other people. He says that this desire to avoid this pain compels us to light our own fire, where we try to take charge of the dark through our own means and for our own purposes. So this natural desire to avoid pain directs us to a path of independence, when in fact the desire for relief and satisfaction, if the hunger is deeply felt, will actually lead us to a path of dependence and interdependence with one another, connection with one another, and also reliance on something greater than ourselves and not thinking that we have to just go it alone. He says, how can this be the case when past trust has actually led us to abuse? So we tried to protect ourselves. We tried to rely on our own resources for self-preservation because this is what seems reasonable of what we have to do in a world where things like abuse exist. There seems to be a battle here of the abused person trying to make a change that can open the door to something better for themselves, and inevitably we can face re-victimization. So the question here is, how does our style of relating to others lead to a deeper experience of life as it is meant for us to be lived? This Bible verse that we quoted indicates that the self-protective strategy, obviously, like he said, leads to torment. And so someone who's looking deeply within themselves and realizing, okay, the way that I've been doing things has not been working out. This is depleting me. This person must then take the initiative to keep their own soul intact by going against their very nature of self-protectiveness. So to even face this darkness that we've been walking through, to even face the patterns that have not been working for us, we have to go against our protective capacity to keep ourselves safe. We have to learn to trust again. We have to learn to relate to others in a different way. He says that the self-absorbed interest in keeping ourselves intact, keeping ourselves safe, actually leads to a violation of love, which diminishes the essence of who we actually are deep down. And so the degree that we go to keep ourselves intact, that is the degree to which we become less vulnerable, less loving, less humanity embracing, and more like the people who abuse and dehumanize for their own survival. Why is style of relating important? He says that if you ask Christians where they struggle with this concept of sin, a lot of people would answer in a way that their struggle revolves around an act or a behavior, such as having a lack of discipline or a failure to perform in some way up to someone's standards. And he says, of course, this constitutes a failure in many people's eyes to love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. But if we're looking at this concept of sin here, if we define it as something that is just behavioral, then there are other more subtle and harmful things here that are going to be ignored. So it's not such a broad picture. So honoring this need for humanity, this need for loving ourselves, loving others, the experience of loving life in general is often carried out through connecting to other people. But it's in this connecting with other people that we find ourselves committed to avoiding pain. And so we have this call to love, this desire for connection, but we also have this determination to avoid pain. And so it sets up a sort of contradiction in the soul. And one of these is going to eventually give way to the other. And the outcome is actually what determines the quality of our life, the quality of our capability of loving here, loving ourselves, loving others, living for what we feel is our higher purpose. So if we ignore or trivialize this self-protective manner of dealing with people, then we overlook this depth of hunger in our heart that we want to take charge of our life in a way that we can't be hurt again, or in a way that we were hurt in the past. But that if we don't recognize that this is harming us deep down, then we're not going to desire change. We're not ever going to be able to deeply love ourselves or others. Here he asks, how is a style of relating formed? So we have past abuse, such as physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. We also have the byproduct of smaller harms here, such as being criticized, being ignored, things like that. These, of course, set the scene and set the tone for the development of a self-protective style of relating. Even those of us who have not been sexually abused, of course, have been harmed in other ways. And so this causes us to change the way we relate to ourselves and, of course, change the way that we relate to others. We do have attributes and talents that are going to set us apart from one another. One person may choose to keep other people at a distance and have a detached academic, scholarly standpoint on life. This might be more likely to be a person with a higher IQ than a lower IQ, for example. And culture also plays a role in this relational style. So he compares this here to an aristocracy, haughty disdain versus an inner city swagger. But the cause and function of these behaviors are the same. They're to keep us safe in the environment which we want to thrive in. The cause of these self-protective mechanisms is because the heart does not want to be alone. It does not want to be unloved. It doesn't want to feel used or out of control. We're not meant to be this way. He gives an example here of a man whose wife was extremely turned off by his high religious morals and the pressure that he constantly put on her to pray and come back to the Lord. And even though she said that she was a Christian, she was not adhering to the same moral standards as him. And so he saw her as someone who needed to repent and needed to change. And their relationship was not able to change until he realized that his style of relating was cold, formal, emotionless, and critical. And so at that point, he realized that what he thought was a deep love for his wife and a desire for her to do right and do good in the world and reap the benefits of that, it was actually a commitment to control his wife, which was controlling an aspect of his own life to keep himself safe. And this was not actually love. The author gives a few specific styles of relating here. So this may or may not apply in part or in full. This is not to say that these are the only styles of relating. These are simply ones that he has come across and formed these archetypes in his own practice. So we have the good girl, the classic helper, kind-hearted, gentle, wants to keep the peace and sustain the people who she's in relationship with, even if it comes at a cost to her. He says the good girl is pleasant but rarely alive. The woman who described herself as a house with the lights on, but never at home. She responds with pleasant warmth and social ease, but she never views herself as alive within herself. The internal world of this good girl is full of self-contempt, which is usually private and hidden. They may struggle with fantasies or sexualization of close relationships, but are ashamed of such or feel they're going to pay a price for doing so. The price that they usually pay is self-hatred and contempt, and this can be intensified by constantly trying to punish themselves or get free from some burden that they constantly put back on themselves by trying to be better and better to be good enough. This is a pattern of limiting and controlling emotion, which is true in many areas of a good girl's life. She only allows herself a small portion of pleasure or pain. If she's hurt by someone, she can feel the pain, but only up to the point where she feels either too intense or too angry, and then the hurt may become guilt, such as, I know I shouldn't feel so hurt, or I feel terrible for not forgiving this person, but I feel helpless. This actually intensifies a sense of alienation and discord in relationships. A number of good girls have acknowledged to him that they feel as if they don't have a voice. The internal world often feels controlled, lonely, and passive. The external world is typically very organized, not necessarily under control, but at least seeming to be so, pleasant, sacrificial, and she's often an energetic worker, organizer, and performer, but does not want to impose on others. She will likely allow her health to deteriorate rather than ask for help. She usually faces the world alone and usually manages well until her physical or mental health is stretched beyond the breaking point. She's typically a martyr. She typically overgives, far more comfortable giving help by her hands than by her heart. So if a friend were to point out the contradiction between receiving help instead of love, then this could result in guilt, self-contempt, and even depression. A good girl is also likely to be a person who works or even overworks at relationships, and so she will not rest until she thinks that others are pleased with her. The thought that someone may be upset by her actions may cause her a loss of appetite or a sleepless night. The effect of this style of relating is to gain a superficial involvement from others without earning their deep respect. So she really wants other people to give her words of affirmation, to marvel over her commitment or her zeal or her love. But a lot of times the behavior can actually start to seem empty or even subtly manipulative, because a person who becomes involved with a good girl, of course, feels invited to use her or take her for granted, because this is a person who gives and gives and gives, and they may not even want to do so, but it's almost impossible not to because she's making herself so readily available. This is a woman who has disengaged herself from the wounds of her soul. A lot of times she can recall some elements of the past, but will mislabel them or believe that they were her fault. A lot of times this is a woman who was an ally of the abuser, or at least a ready helper who others turned to for comfort and support. So she's probably a good listener, valued for her care, and she was probably abused because they knew that she would keep quiet about it. Then we have the tough girl, the classic take charge, task-oriented, no nonsense. Her heart may be gold, but also hard. The hardness is the result of being controlled by other-centered contempt. If the good girl was a woman who could not live inside herself, then the tough girl is a woman who lives behind thick, impenetrable walls. Internally, she may feel above her own feelings, suspicious of others' motives, and arrogant or even angry in her evaluations of others. She may view human needs or emotions as childish and unnecessary. She will likely not console a crying child for very long. She may be okay with it for a minute, but then try to get the child busy doing another activity. This may even resort to shame. So something along the lines of, you're a crybaby. If you keep crying, I'll have to give you a diaper. These are very specific examples here. Again, this may not apply to everyone. A tough girl views her longings as sentimental, sloppy, and weak, a defect that must be eradicated. It's not that human hunger is awful, because a lot of times she can justify her response towards others as a demonstration of realistic concern. She's not going to necessarily shame herself for having emotions at all, but her hunger for involvement and closeness is severely undermined by her refusal to be dependent on anyone. And so these longings can be a sign of weakness if she's unable to resolve this on her own. Emotions are often seen as something to be conquered and controlled so that no one can cause her pain again. And so all of this results in the tough girl seeming suspicious and critical. She may perceive others' movement towards her as an attempt to dominate, and so she may dislike kindness or be suspicious of it. She may feel human warmth is unnecessary or even dangerous, and compliments could seem more like sucking up rather than just a nicety to her. She often has a good idea of when someone is being shady, so she can likely spot someone who's lying a mile away. But this is also a suspicious lens over life, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So her standoffish ways may cause family members, friends, and loved ones to sense this defensive, hostile attitude, and they may feel a fear of judgment or attack, and so they become standoffish and critical in return, which means that this is further proving her suspicions that people are out to hurt her. Her mood is also often expressed in opinionated arrogance, which is really just a cover-up for anger or fear. This is often a woman who knows how to run the family, invest money, run the youth group, help on the city government, plan the 4th of July parade, many things here, because this is a very competent person, and they won't likely ask questions unless it's a pretext of sharing their own side of the story. This comes from an assumption of, I know best. This is an internal hardness and suspiciousness and even superiority that is not always obvious, because a lot of times it's hidden under the surface. But there will often be external dynamics that can be noticed, such as what people these days call RBF. So we have the haughty glare, or the please don't disturb me air. And a lot of times the tough girl will appear to be a person who is in charge, a good researcher, a good organizer, and not likely to admit when she has been wrong. She seems to be emotionally impenetrable and will likely handle a compliment by returning to the sender a terse thank you or a compliment in turn, but letting the person know that nothing more is needed. So the giver and receiver are often left feeling cold and lonely. This is a relational wall that many people find it hard to get through. She's a lot of times appreciated for perseverance and hard work, but feared because she may have a critical eye or hold contemptuous power. The honest tough girl is a lonely woman. Then we have the party girl, the classic easygoing, good time friend, sometimes intense, sometimes mellow, but she is predictably inconsistent and hard to read and likely impossible to pin down in close relationships. So she swings between self-contempt and other-centered contempt. Sometimes it's like she has mastered the ability to hate herself and the other person at the same time. So this is someone who has the ability to draw a person in a relationship and then turn their back on them in an instant. She is complicated. She's usually fragile and funny, sincere and phony, blunt and dishonest, a series of paradoxes. So if she allows herself to agonize over hurt or loss for a brief time, she'll view her anguish as neither selfish, like the good girl would, or weak, like the tough girl would, but rather pointless. There is an acknowledgement that there is pain under the surface, but so what? Feelings are felt, but not deeply faced. Internally, she is inconsistent and ambivalent. She's like a constantly changing storm front, bright one minute, dark the next. People likely will not know what to expect from a party girl. The good girl wallows in guilt. The tough girl brims with rage. The party girl struggles with fear and ambivalence. She may handle a fluctuating hunger for and hatred of relationship through superficial analysis, such as a life will work out, or minimization, such as the abuser was just insecure, not really all that bad, and cynical withdrawal, such as, well, that's just the way life is. It's as if the party girl will not allow herself to be too troubled because she knows that it will lead to a point that will require honesty, commitment, and strength, and it's easier to just laugh or cry over the pain or walk away from it than it is to actually step into the unknown of facing it. External dynamics will often include fickleness, perhaps even a seductiveness in relationships where she can really draw people in, but also a sense of chronic dissatisfaction. So loyalty will be there as long as pleasure is to be found. Once the enjoyment of a new relationship fades or requires hard work, she may find some way to terminate or sabotage the relationship. This is someone who may go from relationship to relationship, replaying a pattern that looks like startup, enjoyment, use, enjoyment, sabotage. So the seductiveness that we're talking about here in the party girl's style of relating does not necessarily mean sexual. This is a larger context of enmeshing someone in a relationship and making sure that this person stays responsive. So the party girl needs the attention, needs the praise, needs the excitement. A lot of times the first evidence of the party girl having control over someone relationally is that this person will feel deeply needed and deeply valued to the point of feeling like the party girl cannot enjoy life without them being there. And this is a thrill to them. They feel special. They often feel so blinded that the author says pastors and counselors have even been known to have affairs with sincere but struggling party girls who really truly appreciated the kind and gentle counsel of a helper. Another clue to the seduction taking place is when a person feels guilty that they have let her down. The person will be so used to meeting the party girl's needs and being there for her that the person may feel like a failure when the needy girl is disappointed. And so she is a master of the I'll live with it kind of dissatisfaction. She's never truly happy, even if she has what she wants. And so this dissatisfaction doesn't just bring a person into a guilt-bonded relationship, but then it also serves to terminate the relationship in a justifiable way. So she may say to herself, why should she stay in such an unhealthy relationship? Maybe the other person is demanding too much involvement, too much commitment, time or energy or money to justify this relationship continuing. And so this is a person who is a pretty quick excuse maker. She may be hard and angry one moment and then confused and needy the next moment, but she seems to have a hunger that cannot be filled. Someone may say, I can never do enough to make them happy. This keeps every interaction superficial, and it pretty much dissolves any chance of a good relationship, because there's an uncertainty and an anxiety generated here by the ambivalence. The author says that it's easy to stereotype the good girl as the typical downtrodden housewife or the perfect pastor's wife. It's easy to stereotype the tough girl as the typical liberated woman, driven executive, or ministry staff director, and the party girl as the bar-hopping, promiscuous girl. But these stereotypes really don't tell you much about the complexity of what's really happening here. And so a party girl can also be very committed and very moral, but just laughs off problems and has even good habits that they use to distract from their emotions. Just as many good girls who have lived with guilt for so long actually engage in affairs because they believe that they're not going to deserve better or live up to better than that. He says that promiscuity is not just for the party girl and drivenness is not just for the tough girl. The tendencies in the style of relating are open to countless variations. Each style of relating emphasizes one kind of contempt over another, but not to the point of excluding the other. So every good girl has a deep streak of other-centered contempt, which is often under the surface and waiting to show itself at the right moment. And every tough girl also hides a pretty good size of self-contempt, even though she's more comfortable with hating others. And every party girl, he says, has an uncanny capacity to glide between self and other-centered contempt. But at the risk of stereotyping, each of these styles can be briefly summarized. The good girl is committed to pleasure and relief through faithful attendance to relationship. The tough girl is committed to pleasure and relief through the exercise of power, through control and intimidation. And the party girl is committed to pleasure and relief through the enmeshment and control through seductive lust and or guilt. The good girl will draw support and pleasantness from others, but in the long run will be lonely and more deeply abused. The tough girl will draw respect and distant admiration, but will be lonely and feared. Her intimidation will keep abuse at a minimum, but in the long run, her arrogance and abusive interactions with others will provoke retaliation and vengeance. The party girl will elicit laughter and anger, goodwill and hatred. At core, she will confuse and frustrate others. She will invite involvement, but intimacy often will degenerate into rage or fear, leading her to abuse others or be abused by them. In the end, she will have deeply harmed others and be equally devastated by their frustration and withdrawal. So, all of these archetypes are both victims and agents. Their styles of relating are not only byproducts of their past abuse, but also of their attempts to find life apart from this dependent and vulnerable relationship that requires us to love ourselves and love others and live for a higher purpose here. So we're going to be disentangling the true person from the defensive style of relating when we're growing through these challenges. So if we notice any of these traits in ourselves, that's not to say that we have to fall solidly into one category another, but rather to say, I notice these traits in myself, and this is something that can be improved upon. And this is the work of separating your identity of yourself from the identity of the archetype or of the wounded victim. Nothing can be done to take away the heartache or the failed relationships or relational styles of the past, but our hope is that the past doesn't have to keep staining the present or shaping the future. So having a perspective on the damage of the past abuse, internal and external, can set the stage for us for understanding how this relationship with ourselves, this relationship with our others, and this connection to a higher purpose here, what we're here for, the joy that we're here for, the connectedness that we're here for. This is so important in the process of healing and changing and growing.